My name is Walter P. Grayson, and I am 81 years old. I used to be a literature teacher for nearly 4 decades, first at Garfield High, then later at a small community college just outside of Tacoma. I've read and taught stories of betrayal, redemption, and human weakness all my life, and yet I never thought I would live inside one myself. My days now begin early, not because I am particularly eager to face them, but because sleep grows thinner with age, and the body begins to follow the rhythms of discomfort more than the desire for rest. When I wake, I lie still for a while, listening to the ticking of the old mantel clock, one of the few things I brought with me from the house on Ashmore Drive, where I lived with my late wife for over 40 years. Time, I find, has become a cruel companion. It no longer runs, but circles, slow and looping, returning me again and again to the same memories, the same regrets, the same thin hopes. Since I broke my hip last winter slipping on a patch of ice behind the mailbox, I haven't been able to live entirely on my own. The doctors at St. Mary's said I could recover with physical therapy, but I would never regain full mobility. Carla, my daughter, suggested I move into the guest suite of her home in the suburbs of Seattle. At first I was hesitant. After all, I still had my faculties, and I took pride in managing my own affairs, my medications, my bills, my food. But she insisted, and there was something in her voice, not concern exactly, but certainty, that made resistance feel both futile and ungrateful. "We'll look after you, Dad," she had said. "It's safer this way. You'll be with family." The guest suite turned out to be a converted garage with a small kitchenette, a recliner, a hospital-style bed, and a bathroom the size of a broom closet. The room was cold in the mornings and smelled faintly of fertilizer from the garden shed on the other side of the wall. But I told myself it was temporary, a phase of transition, a compromise. Carla had 2 children, my grandchildren, though I rarely saw them. Tyler was in college now, someplace in Oregon, and Lily, the younger one, seemed to live almost entirely in her phone. They didn't come down to the guest suite often. I wasn't invited upstairs much either. Meals, if I didn't cook them myself, were brought down to me in Tupperware. Carla would knock, come in, and set a tray down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thought you might like some pasta," she would say. "We had extra." Sometimes I'd ask how her day went, but the answers were short, and she always seemed in a rush to leave. Her husband, Joel, was even less visible. I heard him more than I saw him. His heavy steps on the hardwood floor above, the opening and shutting of drawers, his voice murmuring through the vents late at night, curt and clipped, as if always trying to solve a problem. At first I tried to be helpful, folding laundry, offering to pay for groceries, even suggesting I help Tyler with his essay writing. But none of it seemed to be needed or welcome. Carla would thank me politely, but then redo the laundry, buy her own groceries, and remind me that Tyler had his own process when it came to schoolwork. I started to feel like a guest in a home where no one had invited me, tolerated only because I came with a history and an old surname. It was a strange reversal. I remembered when Carla was young how she used to wait for me by the front door, gripping a storybook in her small hands, eager for me to read to her before bed. She was sharp, articulate, prone to melancholy, but rich in imagination. Lavina, my wife, said Carla got that from me, the restlessness, the introspection. I had always loved that about her. I loved her even when she grew sarcastic in high school, even when she stopped inviting us to her performances and started going out with boys she wouldn't tell us about. I loved her when she came home from college with a ring on her finger and Joel on her arm, even though I saw in him a slickness I didn't like. I kept my doubts to myself, believing, as Lavina often said, that children must make their own choices, even wrong ones. Lavina's passing 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer left a silence in me that never really lifted. We were married for 42 years, and while we had our share of arguments and disappointments, there was an intimacy between us that went beyond comfort. It was understanding, even in silence. She knew my thoughts before I voiced them. She knew when to challenge me and when to sit beside me in quiet solidarity. When she was gone, Carla came over a lot, at first. She helped with the funeral arrangements, sat beside me in the living room, drank coffee from Lavina's old chip mug, and cried only once. After that, her visits thinned out. She had work, children, obligations. My house became a mausoleum of a past life, filled with books I no longer opened and photos I couldn't bear to take off the wall. That's when she suggested the move. "You can't stay here forever, Dad. You need people around. What if you fall again?" She made it sound like compassion, but I saw it as strategy. Now, in the converted garage she calls a suite, I spend most days reading the same dog-eared paperbacks, watering a pot of geraniums she lets me keep on the windowsill, and watching the sky shift through the blinds. No one bothers me much, but no one sees me either. I'm not sure which is worse. My world has become reduced to a 12 by 14 space, a plastic pill organizer, a calendar filled with physical therapy appointments, and little else. The neighbors don't know I live here. The mail comes to her address, but she brings it down filtered, only what she thinks I need to see. I'm not ungrateful. I want that to be clear. I know many old men live in worse conditions in care homes where the staff forget their names, where loneliness is enforced by routine and sterilized decor. I have a roof. I have food. I am not sick, at least not in any way I can't still name. But I do wonder, sometimes aloud, what Carla really feels when she looks at me. Is it obligation, pity, resentment, love? The last time I asked her if she wanted to sit with me and watch an old film, Lavina's favorite, To Kill a Mockingbird, she smiled, said she was too busy, and asked if I'd remembered to take my blood pressure pills. I write this now because I feel a storm is coming, not from the sky, but from the way she looks at me lately, the way Joel doesn't meet my eyes, the way small decisions are made without my consent. They say aging is a return to infancy, but that's a lie. A child is loved for its promise. An old man is tolerated for his inconvenience. I still know who I am. I still remember my wedding day, my students' names, the scent of Lavina's lavender lotion, the way Carla's hand felt in mine when she was 5. I still remember myself. But I'm not sure how much longer I'll be allowed to. It happened on a Thursday, which used to be laundry day back when I lived in my own house. The kind of small ritual Lavina and I both respected, not because we loved chores, but because those small repetitions gave rhythm to a quiet life. That morning I woke up with a dull ache in my lower back and a heaviness in my legs that warned me today would not be easy. The air outside had shifted overnight. There was moisture in it, that pre-storm stillness that always made my joints tighten and pulse like a metronome gone mad. I shuffled slowly across the room, reached for the walker, and made my way to the kitchenette to warm some water for tea. The microwave had been making strange noises for weeks, a faint rattle when it spun, but I didn't mention it to Carla. She didn't like being asked to fix things. She preferred when I didn't need anything at all. The tea was bitter. I had run out of honey, and when I checked the small cabinet where I kept my supplies, I saw that someone had reorganized it. Everything was stacked too high, out of my reach. My arms don't rise like they used to, not since the fall. I made a mental note to ask Carla about it later. At around 10, the pressure in my bladder started to build. Too early for my usual routine, but I had misjudged the amount of liquid I drank the night before. I made my way to the guest bathroom, which is nothing more than a toilet behind a flimsy sliding door and a sink the size of a cereal bowl. There's no tub or shower in the suite. Never was. I usually bathed upstairs every few days when Carla allowed it, under supervision. I hated the term supervision, but I tolerated it. At least it meant warm water, steam, the illusion of privacy. That morning, however, I felt the need to do more than simply relieve myself. I hadn't been able to bathe properly in almost a week. I felt it in my skin, the dryness, the itching, the dull film of oil that clings when you're too long without hot water. I needed a bath. It was more than hygiene. It was about dignity, about not feeling like some dusty relic parked in a corner. So I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other gripping the walker that thudded with each step. The pain in my hip was sharp but bearable. I had done harder things in my life. By the time I reached the top, I was breathing heavily, but I made it. I knocked gently on the kitchen door, then stepped in. Carla was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, a bowl of granola untouched in front of her. Joel wasn't around, probably at work, though what exactly he did I still couldn't explain. Something with finance, he once said, the kind of job that lets you work from home but still remain unavailable to everyone in the house. Carla looked up at me with surprise, then narrowed her eyes. "Dad, what are you doing up here?" she asked, not unkindly, but with that edge in her voice I'd come to associate with rules being broken. "I need to use the upstairs bathroom," I said. "The one with the tub. I want to bathe today. I feel dirty." She frowned. "You should have told me. You're not supposed to come up the stairs without someone there. What if you'd fallen?" "I didn't fall," I said quietly. "I was careful. I just need some warm water. The guest suite has no bath. You know that." Carla sighed and set down her phone. "Dad, the tub is dangerous. We've talked about this. You could slip getting in or out. Your physical therapist said you need to limit strain. We can get you some wipes for now, or maybe I can schedule someone to come help you wash downstairs." I stood still, feeling heat rise to my face. "I don't want wipes," I said, louder than I intended. "I want to bathe, just once. I can sit on the edge. I can take my time." "It's not safe," she said sharply, rising from her chair. "We can't risk another injury. I can't lift you if you fall, and Joel can't either. This isn't a hospital." "It's a home," I said. "Or at least it used to be." She looked away for a moment, pressing her lips together, then turned back with a brittle smile. "I'm sorry, but I have a Zoom call in 10 minutes, and I really don't have time for this right now. Please go back downstairs, Dad. We'll talk about this later." "No," I said. "No, we talk now." She raised her voice slightly, more exasperated than angry. "You can't just come up here whenever you want. This is our space. The guest suite has everything you need. There's a toilet. There's water. If you need help, ask. But don't make decisions like this. That's how people get hurt." For a moment I stood frozen, caught between shame and disbelief. "So I'm not allowed to use the bathroom now?" "You have a bathroom," she said. "It's downstairs. There's no bath. You know that. And sometimes a man needs more than a toilet." "Then you should have thought of that before coming up here on your own," she snapped. Then, as if catching herself, softened again. "Dad, please go lie down. You're clearly upset. We'll figure something out tomorrow. I want to clean myself today." "Well, that's not happening. I'm sorry." She moved toward me, lightly took my arm as if to guide me back toward the stairs. Her hand was firm, not violent, but insistent, like a nurse steering a patient who's wandered too far. I pulled away and stood my ground. She stepped back and crossed her arms. "Fine. If you insist on acting like a child, maybe we'll need to treat you like one." The words struck harder than they should have. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came. She turned away and went back to her laptop, signaling the conversation was over. I stood there for another moment, the smell of coffee and lemon-scented countertop cleaner wafting in the air. I looked at the hallway, past it. The door to the upstairs bathroom stood closed, just 15 steps from where I stood. 15 steps and a wall of permission I was no longer granted. I descended the stairs slowly, this time with less focus. Each step a small retreat from my dignity. In the kitchenette I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my thighs. The shame was new. Not just the denial of something basic, but the implication behind it, that I could no longer be trusted even with water, even with my own skin. I thought of Lavina. She would have drawn the bath for me, set out fresh towels, reminded me gently to take my time and lean on the side rails. She never treated me like a burden, not once. And here I was, less a man than a medical liability. Later that evening, I heard Joel and Carla talking upstairs. Their voices were muffled, but I recognized my name. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught phrases like "too stubborn," "not sustainable," and "need to plan long term." I sat in the recliner and stared at the ceiling, the plaster stained faintly from an old water leak. Somewhere between the cracks, the future was being discussed, my future, but I wasn't invited into the conversation. That night I dreamed of water, cold, dark water filling a bathtub. I climbed in and sank, not from weight, but from resignation. When I woke the next morning, the plastic bag with my hygiene supplies was missing from the bathroom drawer. In its place was a pack of adult wipes and a note. "Let's try this for now. Carla." That was the moment. Not the bath itself, not the refusal, but the quiet substitution, the silent decision made for me, without me. That was when I realized something had changed, not just in Carla, but in the structure of how my life was now being shaped. I wasn't slipping. I was being slowly erased, stroke by stroke, until all that remained was a compliant shadow, softened and manageable, pre-approved and silent. But I wasn't ready to disappear, not yet. The days following the bathroom incident unfolded with a quiet hostility that was more unnerving than any shouting match could ever be. Carla did not mention the episode again, nor did she offer an apology or an explanation. Instead, she simply adjusted the daily routines around it, as if what had happened was a natural progression, a silent but deliberate shift in how things now operated. The first sign came in the form of a calendar taped to the kitchenette cabinet above the microwave, a color-coded grid filled out with appointments, delivery times, and care notes. "To keep everything organized," the note said in her handwriting. But I noticed that it was filled out entirely without my input. Each square marked when I should take my pills, when I should nap, when I could expect meals to arrive, and when I was scheduled for outside time, a phrase that made me feel like a pet needing controlled exposure to the world beyond my small quarters. At first I tried to ignore it. I followed my own routine as best I could, reading in the morning, walking the perimeter of the small backyard in the afternoon, listening to the radio in the evening. But soon Carla started referring to the calendar with authority, asking me pointedly why I hadn't rested at 2:30 or why I hadn't eaten the soup left for me at noon. She began using phrases like, "You're going to mess up your rhythm," and "It's important we stick to the structure," as if she were quoting some manual for elder care. One afternoon, when I mentioned that I might walk a bit further down the block, maybe to the corner store for a newspaper, she shook her head and said, "Not without supervision, Dad. It's not safe. You've already had one fall. Let's not repeat it." And with that, my right to step beyond the fence line was quietly revoked. Joel, for his part, had become even more withdrawn. When I did see him, it was in passing, on his way to the garage, his gym bag slung over one shoulder, earbuds already in place. He never addressed me directly unless Carla was around. One morning I heard him mutter, "What's the point of this setup if he won't even follow the plan?" And Carla shushed him quickly. That word, setup, echoed in my head. What exactly had they set up? Not long after, a man came to the house, a nurse, or so Carla said. His name was Brent, and he arrived with a clipboard, a laminated name tag, and the kind of smile that people wear when they're used to being distrusted. He asked me a series of questions about my memory, my sleep patterns, whether I had ever wandered off or forgotten where I was. I answered honestly, "Yes, I forget things now and then, but nothing unusual for someone my age. Yes, sometimes I wake in the night, but who doesn't after 80? No, I had never wandered off. I asked why he was asking these things. Brent smiled too wide and said, "Just part of routine elder assessment, Mr. Grayson. We want to make sure you're getting the right kind of support." That phrase again, support. As if care could be measured in charts and check-ins rather than respect and dignity. Later that week, I found my blood pressure pills missing from the pill organizer. When I asked Carla about it, she said she had moved all my medications for safety reasons. She now kept them in a lockbox in the kitchen upstairs, and I would need to request each dosage at the appropriate time. When I asked why, she answered calmly, "Because it's safer this way. We can't risk double doses. You've been forgetful, Dad. Don't you remember missing your pills last week?" I hadn't missed anything. I kept a small notebook by the bed where I logged every pill I took. I showed it to her. She barely glanced at it. "Still," she said, "this is better. No need to complicate things." I said nothing, but I felt the notebook grow heavier in my hands, as if it were the last shred of proof that I was still capable of taking care of myself. That weekend, they held a barbecue. Some neighbors came, friends of Carla and Joel. I was not invited. I watched from my window as people laughed, drank wine, and passed skewers over the grill. I caught sight of Lily for a moment, my granddaughter, leaning against the patio railing, scrolling through her phone. I wanted to call out, wave, ask her to come down and say hello. But before I could even rise from my chair, Carla came down with a paper plate of food and set it on the kitchenette counter. "Thought you might like some ribs," she said, smiling. "There's peach cobbler, too." She closed the door behind her without waiting for me to respond. I sat alone, chewing meat that had gone cold, listening to their laughter drift down through the vents. The next morning, Joel appeared at my door holding a thick folder. "Need your signature on a couple of things," he said. His voice was neutral, businesslike. "We're updating some of the property paperwork, making sure everything is streamlined. Just a formality." He handed me a pen and pointed to the line marked X. "Right there," he said. "You don't need to read all that. It's standard stuff. We're just aligning legal responsibilities in case of emergency." I looked at the pages. They were full of legal language, small print, bolded sections. I had left my glasses upstairs, and Joel made no move to retrieve them. "Come on," he urged gently. "This'll make everything easier for everyone." I hesitated, pen in hand. Something in my chest tightened, but I signed 3 times. And Joel smiled, collected the papers, and said, "Thanks, Walt. You're doing the right thing." That night I sat awake in the recliner, staring at the ceiling fan. My chest ached, not from illness, but from the creeping realization that I had just signed something I didn't understand, something that Joel was too eager to collect. I thought of the house I used to live in, my house, now rented out by a property manager, bringing in steady income, enough to live on. Carla had access to those accounts, but I had always believed I was still the legal owner. I began to wonder if that was still true. I remembered the pen in my hand, Joel's reassuring voice, the missing glasses, the 3 signatures. I felt sick. The final straw came 3 days later. I had been having trouble sleeping. My legs cramped often at night, and the pain was unbearable unless I walked it off. I shuffled upstairs quietly, intending to ask for a heating pad. It was after midnight. I didn't want to wake anyone, but I needed relief. As I passed the kitchen, I heard voices. Carla and Joel were talking low and urgent. "He's getting harder to manage," Joel said. "This is exactly why we needed the paperwork. If he pushes back again, we file. Let the court decide." "We need more documentation," Carla said. "He's still lucid enough to fight. But if we keep tracking things, missed meds, mood swings, he'll look unstable. We just have to be patient." "Should have just put him in a home," Joel muttered. "Would have been easier." "Not until the accounts transfer," she replied. I backed away from the door, my breath caught in my throat. I returned to my suite as quietly as I could and sat in the dark for the rest of the night. They weren't just managing me. They were documenting me, positioning me, preparing for something. I felt like an exhibit in a courtroom, a case study in decline. But I was not gone yet. I still had my mind, and it was time to start using it. It was a Sunday evening when everything finally came into focus, slowly at first, like watching shapes emerge through fog, then, all at once, with the clarity of betrayal too bold to ignore. I had been feeling off all day, not physically, but emotionally, a heaviness in my chest that wasn't quite sadness or fear, but something harder to name. An instinct, maybe, or the dull weight of dread that comes from knowing something is wrong, even before the facts catch up to it. Carla hadn't spoken to me since Friday, except to deliver my meals in silence and remind me, curtly, to take my pills on schedule. Joel was gone that weekend, apparently visiting his brother in Tacoma, but I didn't believe that. I suspected he was laying groundwork somewhere, preparing paperwork, or talking to someone who could make things irreversible. The atmosphere in the house had shifted entirely. Even Lily, who rarely looked up from her phone long enough to speak to anyone, had begun avoiding me altogether. I was being airbrushed out of the picture like an unwanted stain in an otherwise curated family portrait. That evening, I ventured upstairs under the pretense of asking for a new bottle of eye drops. My supply had run dry, and I knew Carla kept the backups locked in a cabinet next to the pantry. I knocked softly on the doorframe before entering, but there was no response. The kitchen was empty, the lights dimmed, and I could hear the faint hum of a television somewhere deeper in the house. I took the opportunity, perhaps foolishly, perhaps out of desperation, to search for the drops myself. I opened the cabinet. The top shelf was locked, as always, but the lower one had been left ajar, and inside was a brown folder marked Medical Dad. My stomach turned. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of forms, emails, intake assessments, and scribbled notes. My name was on every page. Some were dated weeks ago, others as recent as 2 days prior. There were notes from Brent, the nurse who had visited, with observations that painted a version of me I didn't recognize, disoriented upon waking, occasionally forgetful, displays signs of confusion regarding date/time, needs assistance with hygiene, denies symptoms, potential lack of insight, anosognosia. Another page bore Carla's handwriting, refused bath again, argumentative, obsessed with calendar control, sleep disruptions, paranoia increasing. I stared at these pages, stunned. These weren't just notes. They were a dossier, a case file being built, a narrative being curated in real time, a strategy unfolding in silence while I sat downstairs, reading old paperbacks and listening to jazz, unaware that my life was being rewritten into a script that ended with my signature erased from every document that once affirmed my independence. I heard footsteps approaching and quickly slid the folder back where I found it, closing the cabinet gently. Carla entered the kitchen moments later, surprised to see me. "Dad? What are you doing up?" she asked. Not hostile, but tight, controlled. "Looking for my eye drops," I said calmly. "Ran out yesterday." She nodded slowly, opened the upper cabinet with a key from her pocket, and handed me a new bottle. "You could have asked," she said. "I don't like you coming up here unannounced." I gave a soft laugh. "Yes, I imagine you wouldn't." Her expression changed, just slightly, but enough to confirm that she knew what I meant. We said nothing else. I descended the stairs and closed the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the bottle of eye drops on my nightstand, staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over every page I'd seen. The assessments weren't just speculative. They were building a legal case. And the signature I gave Joel days earlier, it hadn't been for insurance or emergency contacts. It had been something deeper, something binding. Maybe a power of attorney, maybe an ownership transfer. I no longer knew what I'd given away, only that I had done it blindly, and they had counted on that blindness. The next morning I called Raymond Pritchard, a former student of mine who had gone on to become an attorney. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he still sent me a Christmas card every December. I found the last one and dialed the number he'd printed inside. "Mr. Grayson?" he said, surprised but warm. "Wow, it's been, decades." I told him I needed his help, not with criminal charges, not with suing anyone. I just needed someone I could trust to look at what I'd signed and tell me the truth. He agreed to meet me discreetly the next morning at the public library on Everett Street. I made my way there by bus, using the last of the emergency cash I had stashed inside an envelope in my old copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Fitting, I thought. Edmond Dantes had his prison, and I had mine. Raymond examined the documents I brought, copies Carla had left in a drawer downstairs, thinking I wouldn't know what they meant. He flipped through them in silence, then looked up with a grave expression. "Walter, this is a durable power of attorney. It gives Carla full control over your finances, property decisions, medical directives. If she chooses to act on it, she can sell assets in your name, empty accounts, make legal filings without notifying you." I sat back in my chair, breathless. "Can it be undone?" I asked. He nodded, slowly. "If you're of sound mind, yes, but only if you act quickly. If she files for guardianship and presents supporting medical documentation, you could lose the ability to revoke it. Especially if there's a record of memory issues or confusion." I thanked him and promised to follow up. As I left the library, the sky had begun to cloud over, and the first drops of rain fell softly onto my hands like the closing of a curtain. I stood there on the sidewalk, realizing that the life I thought I was living, safe, cared for, protected, had been nothing but an illusion. I had been played not by strangers, but by my own daughter, my own blood. It was no longer about comfort or convenience. It was about control. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to resolve. If they were going to treat me like I was fading, then I would prove, once and for all, that I was still here, still sharp, still watching. I returned home from the library with my jacket soaked through and a silence hanging over me that felt denser than any weather. I didn't turn on the lights when I came in. I didn't call up to Carla. I sat down in my chair by the window in the kitchenette, my small square of autonomy, and stared out at the drooping hydrangeas in the backyard, their blossoms bruised from the storm. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe this could be undone with a conversation, that there was some essential misunderstanding, some misplaced assumption, some tangle of good intentions gone wrong. But Raymond had been clear. The papers I'd signed gave Carla the authority to erase me, legally, financially, medically. She held the pen now. I had handed it to her, and she was already writing me out. The following days unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. I began to notice more signs, details I had previously written off as quirks or oversight, now revealing themselves as deliberate. My access to the main house was curtailed even further. Carla installed a keypad lock on the interior stairwell, claiming it was to keep Lily's friends from wandering. I no longer had a code. "Just call if you need anything," she said with a smile that came too quickly, as if it had been rehearsed. My medication times were now dictated by an app that pinged on her phone and not mine. When I reminded her I could manage it myself, she laughed in that way. People do when they're pretending you're adorable, when what they really mean is that you're obsolete. Mail was no longer delivered to me directly. It arrived upstairs and was filtered. When I asked if I had any letters, she'd say nothing important or just junk mail, and slide one or two envelopes under my door days later. Once I caught a glimpse of a bank statement in her hand, my name on it, unopened, and when I asked to see it, she said, "It's nothing urgent. I'll go over it with you later." But later never came. I had no idea what was in my accounts anymore. I had no access to online banking. My phone, a flip model I had used for years, had been upgraded without my asking, replaced with a touchscreen monstrosity full of apps I didn't understand. It had fingerprint locks I couldn't disable, and all my contacts were gone. "Everything's backed up," Carla had said cheerfully. "Just let me know if you need help." The message was clear. Nothing belonged to me anymore. Not even my tools for communication. One afternoon, while Carla was out running errands and Lily was upstairs in her room, I took the opportunity to retrieve the folder from the kitchen cabinet again. I had memorized the key's location. I unlocked the drawer and took out not just my file, but several others. Inside were legal documents regarding the sale of my former house, the one Lavina and I had bought when Carla was still in kindergarten. According to the paperwork, the house had been refinanced and then sold, the proceeds placed in a trust. My name was nowhere on the final transaction. There was also a will, new, not the one Lavina and I had drawn up together 20 years ago. This one named Carla as the sole beneficiary of what was now described as a managed estate, with Joel listed as successor trustee. There was no mention of me having initiated any changes, no signatures in my own handwriting, just Walter P. Grayson, as represented by Carla R. Halston. DPOA. I read those words over and over, as represented, as if I were already gone. I took photos of everything with the new phone, praying the camera worked, and emailed them to Raymond with a subject line that simply read, "Help." He replied within an hour. His message was concise. "This is worse than we thought. We need to act now." We arranged for an emergency appointment with a geriatric psychiatrist, someone Raymond trusted. If I could be evaluated and found to be mentally competent, we could challenge the power of attorney and possibly reverse some of the decisions Carla had made on my behalf. The test would need to be thorough and official. Carla, of course, would never approve it, so we made a plan. 2 mornings later, I told Carla I wanted to go for a short walk. She gave me the usual lecture about staying nearby, taking my phone, and not talking to strangers. I nodded, played the role of the obedient old man, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. But instead of walking in circles around the cul-de-sac, I flagged down the local shuttle bus and rode to the next town over, where Raymond met me outside the psychiatrist's office. The building was nondescript, beige siding, a faded sign, but inside it felt warm, human. Dr. Regina Holt was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She spent 2 hours with me. She asked questions that mattered. Not puzzles or memory games or where are we now tricks, but questions about my daughter, about my late wife, about the choices I had made in life, and the choices being made for me now. She asked me to explain the concept of betrayal. I told her the truth. I told her what it looked like when your own child looked at you not with love but calculation. At the end of the session, she placed her hand on mine and said, "You're not incompetent, Mr. Grayson. You're grieving. You're isolated, but your mind is clear." She prepared a report that Raymond filed with the county clerk the next morning, alongside a motion to revoke the durable power of attorney on grounds of coercion, misinformation, and lack of informed consent. The clerk accepted the filing and issued a temporary injunction against Carla, preventing her from making any further legal or financial decisions in my name until a hearing could be scheduled. Raymond delivered the papers personally. He said Carla looked stunned, as if someone had pulled the rug out from under her mid-sentence. That evening, Carla came downstairs. She didn't knock. She didn't bring dinner. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her face a mask of professional calm, the kind that made her seem more like a banker than a daughter. "So," she said, "you've decided to make this difficult." I didn't respond. "You know," she continued, "this could have been easy. You didn't have to drag lawyers into this. You didn't have to embarrass the family." I looked at her carefully. "You took my name off the house. You tried to sell my past. You drafted a will I didn't agree to. That's not easy, Carla. That's erasure." She smiled, tight and bitter. "You're old, Dad. You forget things. You confuse dates. We were trying to protect you. By taking everything I had, by making sure you didn't do anything stupid. And what counts as stupid? Asking for my mail? Wanting a bath?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back into the hallway and muttered, "You've always made things harder than they needed to be." Then she turned and walked away. The next few weeks were filled with cold silences, tight-lipped exchanges, and logistical skirmishes. I began receiving my mail again. The keypad on the stairwell was disabled. My medications were returned to a drawer in my suite. But none of this was peace. It was a ceasefire, a temporary truce while the court deliberated whether I was still legally a man or merely a shadow with a name. Then came the final blow. I woke one morning to find my bank account locked. My debit card declined at the corner store. I called Raymond in a panic. He contacted the bank and discovered that Carla had attempted a transfer of over $30,000 just before the injunction was filed. The bank had flagged the transaction and frozen the account pending verification. Raymond intervened, submitted proof of my capacity, and within days the account was restored. But it was a near miss. One more day, and she would have emptied everything. That night I sat alone with a cup of tea and wrote a letter. Not to Carla, not to the court, but to Lavina. I told her I had tried to be the kind of father she believed I was. I told her I had failed to see what Carla had become, or maybe what she had always been. I told her I missed her, and then I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside our wedding photo. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I would no longer sit silently while my life was rewritten in someone else's hand. The hearing took place on a pale Monday morning, the kind of day that smelled like wet cement and early frost, the sky hanging low like a ceiling about to collapse. I wore the only suit I had left, the one from Lavina's funeral, dark wool, too loose now around the shoulders and chest, and a tie she had bought me the Christmas before she passed, a blue silk number with small, faded anchors on it. Raymond picked me up at 8:15 sharp, his hybrid humming politely outside the curb. He didn't talk much on the ride, just nodded occasionally, reassuringly, as I stared out the window at the freeway signs, feeling each one pull me further away from the small life I'd been confined to and closer to the moment everything might finally split open. I'd spent the weekend preparing, not with legal briefs or practice questions, but with memory. I had gone over the timeline in my head again and again, recalling each indignity, each document signed, each whisper I wasn't meant to hear, each plate of food slid under a door like I was a tenant in my own extinction. I wasn't going to argue my worth. I was going to state the truth and let the weight of it land. The courthouse was colder than I expected, sterile in that government-issue way, with laminated floors and buzzing lights that made everything feel like a hospital waiting room. Carla arrived 10 minutes after us, flanked by Joel and a sharply dressed woman with a briefcase and long, impatient strides, her attorney. Carla wore gray slacks, a burgundy blouse, and that same rehearsed expression she wore at church and social events, dignified, concerned, burdened. She didn't look at me at first. When she finally did, it was with a brief practiced smile that struck me, not as recognition, but performance. Joel, as always, said nothing, though his jaw was tight and his eyes refused to settle. I sat across the aisle from them, not out of strategy, but instinct, a literal division of what we had become, two opposing versions of the same bloodline, one clinging to image, the other clawing for personhood. The judge was a lean woman in her 60s, with tired eyes and a wedding ring that looked older than her robe. Her voice was even and efficient. The proceedings moved quickly at first, recitation of documents, reading of Raymond's motion. The psychiatric evaluation entered into evidence. Carla's lawyer objected to the validity of the exam, citing emotional manipulation and unverified conditions of assessment, but the judge waved it aside. "This is not a conservatorship hearing," she said. "We are simply here to determine whether Mr. Grayson was, at the time of signing the durable power of attorney, fully capable of informed consent." The room felt smaller after that, denser. My hands were trembling slightly, but I folded them in my lap and locked my jaw. They called me to testify. Raymond gave me a small nod as I stood. The oath tasted like dust on my tongue. I was asked simple questions first: my name, my date of birth, my profession before retirement. Then they moved to the harder ones. Did I understand the nature of the documents I signed? Did I believe I had been misled? Had I felt pressured? I told them everything, not with drama or embellishment, but with the slow, steady rhythm of someone recounting a long walk through fog and finally remembering the way home. I described how Joel had brought me the folder, how I'd been told it was a formality, how I'd signed without glasses, without explanation, without a single page left for me to review. I described the locked drawers, the withheld mail, the changed phone, the filtered interactions. I described the words I overheard that night in the hallway, the ones that still kept me up like a prayer turned poison. "He's still lucid enough to fight. We just have to be patient." I saw the judge's face change at that line, only slightly. A twitch of the brow, a slow exhale, but it was enough. I had landed something. Carla took the stand next. She began with tears. Not sobs, not a breakdown, but a steady, rehearsed trembling of the voice. She spoke of my decline, my moments of confusion, the time I forgot which day it was, the time I repeated a story twice at dinner. She mentioned doctor recommendations without citing names, safety concerns without specifics. When asked why she didn't explain the documents, she said I had been overwhelmed, and she didn't want to distress me. When asked about the attempted bank transfer, she claimed it was to settle property taxes. When asked about the will, she looked directly at me and said, "I just wanted to make sure things were in place. Dad always said he wanted things to be simple for the family after he was gone." I looked back at her, not with rage, not even disbelief, but something quieter, like watching a building collapse in slow motion, knowing you helped us lay the first brick. The judge recessed for a short deliberation. We sat in silence. Joel whispered something to Carla. She shook her head. I looked down at my shoes, old black leather, worn thin at the toes, and thought of Lavina. I wondered what she would have said if she had seen me here. I think she would have held my hand. I think she would have said, "Don't let them take your name." When the judge returned, she didn't waste time. She ruled in my favor. The durable power of attorney was to be revoked immediately. Carla was barred from acting on my behalf in any legal, financial, or medical matters. Any assets moved under that document's authority would be reviewed and, if necessary, restored. She cited the psychiatric evaluation, the lack of informed consent, and what she called a disturbing pattern of paternal erasure. The room went silent. Raymond exhaled audibly. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply felt the faint, unfamiliar weight of justice settling on my shoulders, like a coat I hadn't worn in years. Carla didn't speak to me as we exited the courthouse. She brushed past without a glance. Joel gave me a look, not pity, not anger, but something bruised and baffled, as if I'd ruined a perfectly good scheme by daring to stay alive. I stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, breathing in the cold air, watching clouds thin into sun. Raymond touched my elbow gently. "You're free now, Walter," he said, and I believed him. But freedom, I was starting to learn, was not the same as healing. It was only the beginning. In the weeks following the hearing, the house changed shape around me, not physically, but in temperature, in air, in how the walls seemed to breathe differently when Carla was no longer holding the keys to my life. The silence between us, once heavy and strategic, now felt final. There were no more soft knockings at the door, no more trays of food left on the counter like offerings. I prepared my own meals again, simple things, eggs, toast, old recipes from memory, unhurried. Raymond helped me open a new bank account. The court mandated the return of all funds transferred under the revoked power of attorney, and although the recovery process was tedious, piece by piece it came back. My Social Security checks, my pension, the rent income from the Ashmore property, now redirected into a trust I controlled. The house Carla had attempted to sell had not yet closed escrow, and due to the injunction, the sale was frozen. I hired a property manager of my own and placed the house back into rental circulation. I requested copies of every document related to my estate, every insurance policy, every title deed, and sorted them meticulously into new folders I kept in the kitchenette, beside the kettle and the stack of Lavina's old cookbooks. I was no longer under watch. I was the watcher now. Carla stayed upstairs for a while, but we didn't speak. Joel disappeared most days, and when he did appear, it was only to walk briskly from the garage to the car, eyes averted, jaw tight. Lily, to my surprise, knocked on my door one evening. She stood there awkwardly, in a hoodie and slippers, and asked if I wanted her help figuring out the new phone. I let her in. She sat at the small table and reprogrammed the settings, showed me how to block spam numbers, added Raymond's contact to the speed dial. She didn't say much, but when she left, she paused at the door and said, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't know it was that bad." I nodded, unsure how to answer. I wanted to ask what exactly she had seen, what she had guessed, what she had ignored, but I let it go. She was still a child in some ways, and in others, not at all. 2 months later, Carla moved out. I wasn't told where. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she had taken a short-term lease near Redmond. Joel went with her. Lily stayed behind, finishing high school, and was now staying with a friend's family nearby. The house, which had once felt like a fortress built against me, now sat half empty, hollowed out by its own ambition. I no longer felt watched, but neither did I feel vindicated. The truth was, I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted someone to say, "You were never the problem." But those words never came, and I stopped expecting them. Eventually, I chose to leave. I didn't announce it, didn't make a show. I packed my things slowly, methodically, just what I needed, no more. I had located a quiet assisted living community in Bellingham run by former educators, a place with books in every room and chairs by the window. It wasn't exile. It was sanctuary. When I arrived, they gave me a tour, showed me a modest room with a small balcony and a view of the pines. I unpacked my clothes, hung a picture of Lavina on the wall, and placed a folded copy of the court ruling in the drawer beside my bed, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that names matter. The stories don't end because someone else tries to finish them for you. Some nights I still think of Carla. I wonder if she regrets what she did, if she ever looks at her own children and wonders how such a chasm can open between generations. I wonder if she'll ever understand that what I wanted wasn't control or wealth or obedience, but presence, respect, to be seen as still alive. Not a problem to solve, not a figure to manage, but a man with history, memory, and voice. I don't hate her, but I will never trust her again, and that's a harder sentence than anything the court could have handed down. I now teach a small discussion group every Thursday afternoon. Literature of conscience, we call it. Most of the attendees are widowers or retired nurses or former professors like me. We sit in a circle, read Baldwin and Chekhov and Morrison, and talk about the gap between what we lived and what we hoped for. Sometimes I bring up Carla, not by name, but in metaphor. I call her the architect of erasure. They nod. They understand. We all have one. Someone who thought they could manage our exit. But we're still here, still turning pages, still telling it our way,